All right, what's up, everyone? We know the last thing you need is another fitness podcast to catch you up on the newest trends and fad diets based off of popular opinion, not research. Enter myself and Tony. We made the Fitness Stuff podcast to make exercise and nutrition science practical. Our goal is to expose misinformation in the industry by providing only evidence-based education. And today I am so excited to share this episode with you. I know Tony is as well. We got to sit down with the, emphasize all caps, the Alan Aragon. And we had probably one of, I think we say this every time, one of the best conversations.
But first, as always, before we get started, it is part of our passion to bring zero cost to consumer education to as many people as we possibly can. So there's a few things that allow us to do so and keep this podcast free. We actually just signed a contract for our first sponsor, Eat This Much. We were fans of these guys before we even started working with them. I think that's kind of why it lined up the way we did. But Eat This Much, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a phenomenal app website that you can access even right on your phone. And what we love about it is the hard part about nutrition and sticking to a diet, if you're trying flexible dieting, if you're trying to track your macros or your calories, is finding different foods and meals that go and fit into those goals. Whether you're trying to build lean muscle, lose body fat, or just trying to improve your general health, the hard part is coming up with those ideas that fit these goals. But Eat This Much, you can actually go in, type in your set calorie, protein, macro goal, whatever you have, and they have a calculator if you don't know those numbers off the top of your head. And then what it does, it auto-generates you meals throughout the entire day that fit those goals, depending if you eat 2 meals, 3 meals, 4 meals, what food preferences you have, anything you want to avoid, and you can just hit refresh as many times as you want to get these meals, the full recipes, how you cook them, all the way. Now, the cool part is you guys can get a free trial of their premium membership because they got a lot of free resources. You can use a lot of the site for free. They have a premium version too that lets you do so much cool stuff. You get a free trial of that. And then if you continue to subscribe after that free trial, you get an extra 20% off if you go through Fitness Stuff. Now, we have a link in our bio that can get you there, but it's just www.eatthismuch.com/fitness stuff if you want to. We'll put that in the show notes and in our bio as well. But I really want to race into this episode because we have freaking Alan Aragon, like one of the coolest dudes that we've sat down with. We've been a big fan of his. I know I've subscribed to his research review for the last 4 or 5 years. Marianna and I have both read his new book, Flexible Dieting. But if you are unfamiliar with who the heck Alan is, he's been a nutrition research and educator for the last 25 years in the field. He started AARR, Alan Aragon Research Review, when there was no such thing as a research review in fitness and nutrition back in 2008. This wasn't a thing. It was a blue ocean. He just started it. There was 0 and then there was 1. There was him that started it up. Outside of that, he co-authored Nutrient Timing Revisited, the most viewed article in the history of the Journal of International Society in Sports Nutrition. The most viewed article of all time. He also wrote this book, Flexible Dieting, which we'll get into. But I mean, me and Marianna, we're like out of breath, right? Is that a good way to say it? We're out of breath from this episode. We were so freaking pumped. It was a long one. We had some technical difficulties, but
It's all part of the process.
Holy cow.
I'm so excited.
It's all part of the process, the beautiful process. Now, I mean, talk about genuine human beings. I'm so pumped for you guys to listen to him. I freaking had a phenomenal time. He will 100% be back for more where we can focus more on the training and hypertrophy aspect, but we go deep into nutrition, different nutritional aspects that are especially hot today. So let us know what you think. We'll talk to you soon. That'd even be a good kind of place to start heading into it, because from my understanding, Alan, do you still coach clients?
Yeah, I do.
Correct?
I do. It's a minor part of the range of things that I do at this point. I only coach a small handful, and I don't put it out there that I'm available for coaching, because I can't take on any more new clients, and it sucks having to turn people down. So yeah.
Yeah, but would you say that you kind of, I mean, why do you keep that as a piece? I mean, I'm assuming your life is ridiculously busy. Why do you keep the one-on-one aspect in there? Because it's interesting to see, because I love the approach of keeping one-on-one. I think you learn so much through going through it. But I also notice a lot of people take the other route of pulling away from one-on-one completely. Yeah. Why do you kind of keep it there?
I just have this fear that if I don't have any any coaching clients and I don't keep that going, number one, I'm going to sort of lose touch with that aspect of just being like an overall evidence-based practitioner. I feel like I'm going to sort of lose those skills, or at least, greatly diminish them, and that kind of bothers me. And I'm also afraid of kind of getting out of touch with that population. And so I think it's important to be able to have one foot in the trenches at least. So yeah, that's a good question. I guess I just want to make sure I have those skills and I keep those skills real sharp.
I appreciate that. Marianna and I talk all the time about how much you learn just through going through so many different experiences with so many different clients. I mean, with the research review, with everything you have going on, I'm sure like having coaching clients too just adds a lot on top of the plate. So I think that's a really cool aspect. But I know Marianna and I would freaking love to get a little background story because your background seems incredible.
Man.
Who is Alan Aragon, and kind of in the space of nutrition science, but also outside of nutrition science? Who are you? What do you do when kind of people ask you that question?
So the thing that I've boiled down to telling people when they ask what I do is I tell them that I'm a professional footnote or a professional citation at the end of college term papers. And also I'm also a footnote at the bottom of various bits of peer-reviewed literature. That's my current role, is just assembling the foundations of scientific knowledge that coaches and dietitians use in practice. So a lot of the work I've done, a lot of the research publications, the studies, the reviews, the meta-analyses, a lot of that stuff does serve as the framework and the bones of the practice guidelines used by coaches currently. It's an unusual role, but I would say I'm an educator / researcher. And the origin of all that is an interesting story because it wasn't specifically planned. I got my start in the field in 1992, which is almost 31 years ago. So I graduated high school in 1990. Graduated in 90, and I spent almost 2 years in a graphic design major, and then I switched over to a nutrition major because I saw that there was this brand new burgeoning field called personal training that maybe had a shot of actually becoming a real job. And I thought it would be a good idea to have a nutrition degree to kind of separate myself from kind of the market, maybe give me a leg up on the set of people trying to enter the market of this brand new field called personal training. So that happened. I got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree both in nutrition, and so that was like the first decade of my career consisted of personal training. So 1992 to 2002. Full-time personal training. And then from 2002 to 2012, it was a mix of personal training, but a little bit heavier on the nutritional counseling. I already had my graduate degree in human nutrition. And I chose to not become a registered dietitian for one reason or another. It just didn't necessarily speak to me. That route didn't really speak to me because I mainly wanted to stay in fitness. I kind of wanted to stay out of the hospitals and out of food service, food science and stuff like that. And after that, like 2012, that's when my career evolved from training to nutritional counseling to education. And it's really hilarious because there's this disparaging quote that says, "Those who can do, those who can't teach." Really freaking insulting saying that applies to like folks who never made it in athletics, and so they're coaches or professors. And so I thought that was pretty hilarious.
Okay, it's really interesting to me that you started off with graphic design. So I feel like at least, and you might be different, but a lot of the people I meet that are into the arts, they score really high on like creativity and enthusiasm, and they choose that route because they're really passionate about that route. So I want to ask, one, would you score yourself high in those personality traits, and did that transfer over to your choice? What specific things were kind of popping up that made you say, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot? And did your personality have a play in your success?
Yeah, dude, the answer to that is far less interesting than it could be. You know, some people who, when they're really young, they know exactly what they want to do. And they go for it and they start studying for the SAT in their freshman year of high school, you know? I'm just a very late bloomer at stuff that I do. I don't know. I'm just a very late bloomer. So I was very late in coming to grips with what I really wanted to do with my life. And so it was actually my parents, my mom specifically, who said that I should do the graphic design major. I was really talented at drawing and painting. And she's like, you're going to starve. If you want to be a fine artist, you want to sell paintings and whatnot, you're going to starve. So what you need to do is go a more practical route and take your artistic abilities and go into commercial art. Go into graphic design. And I'm like, okay. And so I went into it, honestly hated the program. I would rather have gone into fine art and just do paintings and drawings and sell them on the sidewalk on Santa Monica Pier or something like that. So yeah, I hated it.
There's some good ones out there.
When I said that, I was like, oh, okay. So what I ended up doing was I ended up talking to one of the college counselors. And she asked me a series of questions, and an important question being, so Alan, what are you interested in? Okay, so you don't like this graphic design stuff. Like, what do you want to do? What do you like? And I'm like, I love fitness. I love working out. I love nutrition. I love the whole fitness thing. And she's like, okay, well, why aren't you in an exercise or a nutrition major? Why are you in graphic design? And I'm like, well, it's because I like this thing called personal training, and I don't know if it's a legit career path because almost nobody's doing it, and it just was born, and I'm kind of afraid to go into that. And she's like, you know what, regardless of whether personal training is going to flourish as a legit career path or not, you just need to do what you love. So if I were you, I'd pick either a nutrition major or an exercise major. And I'm like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So I went back home and I ran the idea by my girlfriend at the time, because she knew I had a 50-50 love for exercise and nutrition. So she's like, why don't you do this? Since you can get a personal training certification, why don't you get the personal training certification and go for the nutrition degree? And I was like, yeah, this girl's smart, so I'm going to do that. So yeah, my ex-girlfriend from a million years ago, she deserves credit for putting me on the path.
Shout out to her.
Like while my mom, she meant well, it ended up putting me on this long winding path. It was since that point that I got my nutrition degree. I finished my nutrition degree, my undergraduate degree in dietetics, food science, nutrition. I was going to stop there, but then for one reason or another, I decided that I maybe should get the master's degree. And I think what precipitated that was me watching my classmates file off to dietetic internships and me feeling kind of left out and maybe like not having an edge in the marketplace while they worked their asses off in their internships and got their RD credential that was just so coveted and so hard to get. So I did my master's degree, and it was during that master's degree that I had a really great professor called Brian Kojal, and he really sparked my interest in research and science, the importance of kind of the scientific evidence basis in driving how we know what we know and what else we need to investigate and what gray areas there are to kind of like cover, what uncharted ground there is to cover in the scientific realm. And I thought that was really cool. It just resonated with me. And then from that point, I finished my graduate degree and I started the research review. That's a whole nother crazy story of how that research review started.
Oh yeah.
and then things
We're gonna hear about it.
Just went from there, man.
Okay, I have a quicker question because I do want to dive into some of the bigger stuff. But it's crazy to me. I think personal training wasn't really a thing until like the late 80s. Maybe this is a selfish question. Is there a career today that's kind of in that similar spot of evolution where it's like it's not quite something you can bank on as a career? Because it's hard for me to imagine that because personal training is everywhere today.
That is a really good question. I'm sure there's a bunch. I'm just in my bubble with the fitness and nutrition and research thing that I'm just kind of unaware of anything else outside the bubble. But you know what, man? There's got to be stuff like that. Maybe even within this bubble, that it's just kind of a cool idea that just a few people are doing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like NFT trading or whatever the kids do these days. But yeah, there's got to be a bunch of stuff like that. But yeah, personal training was definitely one of those things that was born in the late 80s. And by the time I graduated high school, I just had like a couple of friends doing it, and I didn't really know if it was going to work out for them, or whether I didn't know how the field was going to work out. But yeah, it definitely worked out, and it worked out in a big way.
Oh, okay, that's
And
awesome.
I even honestly still think that, as personally having kind of a similar shared experience here of the not wanting to go the RD route, and seeing things in the world of academia and research, and really being so invested in asking why and really wanting to know why. And there's still that kind of, oh, well, what if you do go study nutrition and you're really, really invested in it and you love it, even you get a master's, what are you going to do without the RD? That's not really you're not going to have much security there. You can't do anything in nutrition without that RD. And this was like, I mean, I have deja vu from hearing that just a little over a year ago. So I feel like that can be a similar experience that a lot of people, I'm sure you probably get asked this. I know I get asked all the time.
It's a common crossroads that nutrition students come to at the end of their undergrad. And even at the end of their graduate degrees, it's like, okay, we have this whole population of professionals just sort of lining up and getting their RD credential. And whenever a student asks me whether they should get their RD, I tell them that the RD credential will open up doors for you. But the importance or the crucialness of that credential really depends on, number one, how clinical you're going to want to go, and number two, how entrepreneurial you are. So if your tendency is to take a corporate route or take a institutional route, then the RD credential will definitely work for you. However, if you are more interested in being your own boss and running your own show and more the entrepreneurial route, having your own business, and you do not go into an avenue that has a lot of governmental regulation or clinical frameworks and limits, then you don't need the RD. So yeah, that is a deciding factor for a lot of folks. And also I throw in the little nuance that having the RD credential, it won't hurt. I mean, it does actually have a little bit of a negative stigma for some folks, so maybe it does hurt some folks. But generally speaking, if you have the time and the energy, it'll open doors for you. But it's definitely not a must-have if you want to go into the nutrition field.
So refreshing for me to hear right now.
A little reassurance.
Even coaching, even professional sports teams, they use some quackball coach to gather up their nutrition information and stuff. Like, I mean, somebody with literally no formal education in nutrition. There are some cases where sports teams do hire RDs, and I know a few of them who are working with the sports teams, and thank God the sport teams were smart enough to hire them. But even at that level, it's not even this prerequisite that you've got to be an RD to work with sports teams, but it does give you an edge when they're going down the list of people to choose to work with sports teams. But once again, that is more of a corporate path. If you wanted to just go out on your own into the education realm or the gym ownership realm, or just, like information products and or product development, quacky supplements, that sort of thing.
Make a quick $1 million.
Then you don't need the RD credential. And certainly if you're going to go into fitness, and if you're going to become, I hate to say it, this sounds really funny, if you're just going to become an influencer and build your own audience, you don't need the RD credential in the nutrition world. You just, because there's really no credential. The RD credential does not own the dominion of being evidence-based.
Yes.
And a lot of my RD friends will attest that there's a lot of RDs out there who kind of are promoting like woo and unscientific, non-evidence-based concepts and practices, kind of giving RDs like this bad name. RDs are supposed to be very strict to the evidence-based code, but that is not necessarily the case. But
yeah. Well, and I think, okay, evidence-based, I think this is a good blend because, I mean, you can't have the conversation of like, okay, what is evidence-based without your name coming up? Especially, I mean, and we were talking to Bill Campbell. We had him on the show a little bit ago because he was actually just coming out with his research review, Body by Science. And we were kind of talking about it, just like the topic of a research review. And he was kind of like letting us know, it's like, well, because I think when we were first messaging, I've been sub to ARR, your research review, for I think the past like 4-ish,
that's epic,
5-ish
man.
years
Thank you.
is where I first kind of stumbled upon it. But he was, and he was saying, but then I look back at the past issues when I'm like, okay, I got some free time. I mean, this thing goes back to 2008, like, right? At least 2008. You can't really have that thing. So I think a lot of people's frustration today, especially like listeners, when they look into wanting to make progress in any metric of their health, if it's weight loss, if it's building muscle, if it's just improving any blood test, they feel frustrated because you look out and it's like, what the heck do you believe? So I really want to ask you, because you can't have that evidence-based conversation without you. How would you answer that for someone who's wondering, like, where should my compass be? How do I know what to listen to? How do I know what not to listen to? I mean, it's hard.
Honestly, man, the funny ass question to that is my research review and all of the research review progeny I've spawned.
Yeah.
Those are all the best guys. Me plus basically my children.
Yeah, seriously.
My children. So my children being Mass, Examine.com, Weightology.
Yes.
And Bill Campbell's stuff and Lane Norton's thing now. And so yeah, me and my kids. Those are the best.
Well, that's how I was like, you kind of
literally the best stuff on the thing.
That absolutely kills me. But with yours and Bill Campbell's too, I like y'all's because the communication's you don't cut corners in communicating it in simple terms for anyone, the average person walking down the street, to understand, which is what I really enjoy about it, is you can take these complexities and make it simply understood. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of people face is some people, I think, use bigger terms to sound impressive, to sound like they know what they're talking about, where y'all do it really simply. And I'm like, do you think your research review, for example, and these others, is that a realistic approach? You think people should start considering subscribing to more and more research reviews just to get this education, like a normal average Joe?
If I were to let my ego speak, it's like, I would say, okay, start with my research review, and if you have extra time, check out the others. Because I like being concise. I like speaking in plain English. I don't think a better article is a longer article, and a lot of times a longer article will have the reader's eyes glaze over halfway through, and they won't necessarily even get to how everything ties together. And so there almost has been this competition for who can make the longest issues. How can we hit like 50 pages, 60 pages? And it's like, dude, bro, you know, how can we justify charging more? Oh, add more, but volume, there's limits to the productivity of volume of information. So I would definitely say, get my research review. And then if you have time, then check out James's research review. If you like the exercise side of things, the exercise heavy side of stuff, check out Greg Nuckols and Eric Helms' research review. And so my ego is telling everybody, first check out mine, because I think it's the best.
And Tony was just talking about, which I just think is so fascinating, the longevity of this field and how long you can be in it and how much it can change. I'm really curious to hear about where this industry that we're in, where was that when you started your research reviews, and how has that kind of changed over time, if at all? Okay, so when I started my research review in 2008, but prior to that, from 2003 to 2008, to 2007 when I really started. It was 2007 that I got the idea to do a subscription-based research review. That I was thinking a handful of my followers and people who have been just studying my work and just fans of mine would subscribe to. That's when I got the idea. It was in 2007.
And I actually got the idea by running into a research review for physical therapists, physios, that whole world, that kind of like the physiotherapy and physical therapy world. There was actually a monthly research review for that. But that thing doesn't exist anymore, and I can't even remember what the name was and stuff. So I didn't originate the idea, but I did originally bring the research review concept to the nutrition and fitness space, where studies were looked at and research ideas were synthesized and narrative reviews were written and studies were picked apart. So yeah, I definitely originated that for the nutrition and fitness space. But somebody else did it for the physio space many years ago, and it was basically a failed thing that never lasted. And yeah, and so if we go back to 2003 to 2007, that time period that kind of led to me creating and launching the research review, it was a life of hanging out on the bodybuilding message boards. So for those of you who've never heard of the message boards, we call them the forums or the message boards. This was before Facebook really flourished. This was before Instagram flourished and the rest of the social media platforms. So pre-Facebook, you would get on these freaking message boards. And this particular message board was the bodybuilding.com message boards, which had a lot of subforums, exercise subforums, nutrition subforums. It had the famous, well, underground anyway, the MISC forum. And a lot of the memes, you mad bro, that stuff came from the MISC.
Yes.
And calling somebody bro-telligent or saying bro science, that stuff all came from the MISC. Yeah. And so I just would spend a lot of time on there because it was fun. I mean, humans are social animals. Mm-hmm. We just love to interact with others and share ideas. And on the bodybuilding.com forums, it was really kind of the love of making the light bulb switch on and just teaching folks. Because when I popped on there in 2003, I already had done my master's degree in nutrition. And so I had a pretty keen overview of what information was just really unscientific and unfounded and what information was actually solid that was being shared and talked about and batted around the forums. And so I just literally spent like 4 to 8 hours a day on the forums, answering questions, talking to the members, debating with the ornery folks who had issues with my stuff. And there was a lot of disagreement and debate, and just literally, man, 4 to 8 hours on the forums. And then it just occurred to me, instead of me typing out these 500 to 1,000 word responses and spending 2 to 3 days straight in a back and forth that's really disjointed and would be useful to a learner or a lurker if I just organized my answers into essays with scientific references and also talk about the new studies that are coming down the pike and sort of critique them for strengths and weaknesses and practical applications. I think that would be a cool thing to make a subscription out, to make a magazine out of. And plus, I saw this physical therapy research rag that lasted for a temporary period of time and then disappeared. I'll just kind of take that idea and let's do this for the nutrition and fitness space. So I had that idea, and I sat on it for a whole year before launching the idea. And this was out of just the fear of failure, the fear of how embarrassing would it be if I launched this thing and nobody subscribed to it, and then I would just kind of back myself up into the bushes like Homer Simpson did, and just just never show back up and never talk about it again and just move on my merry way. Lo and behold, I started it. It took about 2014. So I started it in 2008, and then 6 years later, people saw that, hey man, this is a viable business model. For science-minded fitness folks from the training and nutrition realm, this is viable and it can be successful. And lo and behold, man, my students, my star students, created monsters out of them. They just took my model and in a lot of ways, I mean, they're doing their own thing and in a lot of ways they're doing it better than I am.
That's so freaking cool. Okay, it's so interesting. It's just that blue ocean strategy of like you're going into this empty space where it's like there's not one in this industry that's like, I think that's the coolest freaking story. I want to dive into the meat and potatoes where I get really excited to ask you about these nutritional questions. We have it right here too. Your book, Flexible Diet, that just came out. I think this would be a good transition. I know we were just talking about it. We were like having notes and everything.
Thank you.
But I mean, so writing the book, I was telling you I was expecting it just because I'd been a long time sub of Research Review. I was like, yeah, I'm going to buy this book. It's going to be freaking incredible. I want to learn as much as I can about it. I was like, okay, partially expecting the Lyle McDonald book just because of the title.
Yeah, that's right.
Except it's like a newer version. Couldn't be more wrong. Could not be more wrong for my expectations. But I think this is a good place to kind of start and dive into a little bit. I want to get your take. What makes the difference in flexible dieting versus different diet styles? If it's the keto, the paleo, the whatever is hot right now, what separates those two? Because they end in the same word, right? Diet.
I think that in order to get the right conceptual framework, we have to realize that the definition of flexible dieting is a flexibility of dietary approach. So once you see it like that, it's the flexibility of dietary approach. Then you can really see flexible dieting encompasses like anything that you happen to be able to adhere to. Whether it's a paleo type model or whether it's a keto type model, and whether or not you take those in an intermittent fasting way or daily caloric restriction type of way. And there's various aspects of diet. I mean, that's what flexible dieting is. It's the concept that there's no single best way because everybody's got different preferences and tolerances and goals. And so there's going to be a wide range of macronutrient distributions that are suitable for different individuals. And there's going to be a wide range of even hedonic allotment models across individuals. Some will prefer the little bit everyday model. Some will prefer the banger once a week model. And they're all legitimate. And some will love to puff their chest and say, I don't eat any junk food ever. I'm clean 100% of the time. Rah, yeah. Hey man, do you? That's you. You're doing the right thing if you can stick to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the key distinguishing element of flexible dieting is it's the flexibility of the approach. And that also applies to how quantitative you are with your dietary approach versus how qualitative you are with your dietary approach. It's flexible. Some people just want to be the human calculator and just track every gram of carbohydrates, fats, and protein, and of course calories. And they want to do that every day of their lives, and it excites them, and they love it, and keeps them motivated. Hey man, freaking do you. That's great. Others just want to eat more of some foods and less of other foods, have a substantial amount of protein with each of their main meals, and try to force down some fruits and veggies through the course of the day. Okay, great, cool. And then everything in between. And so, yeah, that's flexible dieting. And what flexible dieting is often mistaken as, what is often conflated with and synonymized with is macro counting. Flexible dieting, macro counting. So that's sort of the thing that needs to be corrected, because flexible dieting, the origins of it and how it marched through the literature over like a 10 or 20 year period, it really was the concept that a flexible dietary approach is more sustainable than a rigid dietary approach. So rigid dietary approaches would be a dichotomous view of foods as either good or bad, to avoid, to always have. And dieting itself in the rigid model would be looked at as all or nothing, black and white. And so that sort of rigid model was kind of the antithesis of flexible dieting, which said, if you fall off the wagon a little bit, that's fine, just go back to it. Or you look at flexible dieting as saying, hey, let's allot a margin of indulgence and fun and, in quotes, bad foods, but still have an overall healthy diet. And so that was flexible dieting. It never was punch your carbs and protein and fat into an app with every meal. Everybody needs to do this. That's flexible dieting because, hey, we're flexible in food selection, but you got to count those grams. Yeah, that's not flexible dieting. But that's what it kind of became.
I love that because, everyone's unique. Not everyone is you, and not everyone is going to work this way. But it is a constant assumption that calorie deficit, fat loss, losing weight, instinctually go to a MyFitnessPal calculator. All right, we got to track, we got to make sure everything is perfect, all of my macros hit. What is your opinion on that? Do you have to do this? Is there another way?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think that every single person needs to go through a period where they learn how to track grams of the macronutrients, because that is a very micromanaged way of tracking intake. There are other ways that are far less granular, but not necessarily less effective. I mean, sometimes they're more effective because sometimes they're more sustainable. So when I was coming up in the dietetics curriculum, we taught people how to track portions of each food group in order to hit not just their calorie goals and macronutrient goals, but also their balance goals across the range of food groups, so they can get a good balance of micronutrition in the process. And so I think that it can be even more holistic and more sustainable for people to learn the food groups and allocate servings per food group that would equal your theoretical, or even just ranges within the food groups to equal your theoretical requirements. And that's kind of how, that was sort of like the old school registered dietitian way of doing it, and that's the way that a lot of them still do it today. And I think it's a very helpful way of educating folks on their needs without having to put some folks through counting just the minuscule units of measure, like grams of protein, carbohydrates, and fats. But that's a whole skill that dietitians learn that not everybody is exposed to the training to be able to do. So therefore, the default is MyFitnessPal or whatever, and punch in the grams. So now, with all of that said, I think it is useful for those who are open to putting in the time and the effort, and those who enjoy quantifying stuff. I'm not going to say like accountant types, but yeah, that'll include accountant types of folks who are not intimidated by kind of the granular micromanagement and quantification of everything. I think that if you go through a period of tracking grams of everything, then you learn what the values are nutritively of the foods that you consume and in the amounts that you typically consume them. And I think it's a useful thing to know. But I also think that the majority of the population needs to have the intentions of actively breaking away from that level of micromanagement, because only a minority of the population will actually enjoy that and be sort of psychologically healthy doing that all year round.
Yeah, we've talked about this several times on the show too. That's kind of the goal, is not to do this forever and just kind of break away from it. But I want to get your take on, because we had Stan Efferding on, we were talking to him the other week. He's probably the epitome of the like micro king, is what I would call. Like, he's incredible with how he aligns his diet, his vertical diet. What's your kind of take on setting these goals, a protein goal, a calorie goal, and then some might take the next steps of setting a carb and a fat goal, and then kind of having the freedom to fit whatever they want. They take flexibility to a whole nother meaning, essentially. With your clients specifically, and I'm sure it's different person to person, but how do you communicate that balance of, hey, we should be eating this amount of whole, more nutrition foods because these micros matter, versus whatever we can do to fit these specific goals? How do you balance that?
It kind of goes back to the ancient dietetics curriculum of the food groups. So the reason why there's different food groups is because different foods have unique concentrations of their own strong points, nutrient-wise. Like the obvious example would be the dairy group and the bone-building nutrition. Another obvious one would be the, in quotes, meat group or the protein group and its provision of protein. And then, of course, you have fruits and vegetables, which give their fiber and their micronutrition and their phytonutrition. And then you've got the fat group to provide fats and within that, certain types of fats that you should be striving to get. And then the starch group would encompass a diverse range of foods, from grains and grain products to starchy vegetables, which would include beans, peas, corn, legumes, yam, squash, those sort of things. And then the grains and grain products are kind of self-explanatory. And each of those food groups, meat, fat, fibrous vegetables, starchy vegetables, milk and dairy, and fruit. Each of those 6 food groups offers unique nutrition, and you would want to cover the full range of those food groups. Although I have vegan friends who would argue against the dairy group because they're vegan and it suits their ideology. Mm-hmm. But the reality of the matter is that you are striking a compromise in health, and you are raising the opportunity cost of not eating certain food groups because of ideological reasons. And so the way to optimize is to eat a certain amount of servings per food group in order to achieve good dietary balance or a healthy diet. And so without even talking about grams, and we can tell, like what I've done with my clients when I set up their diet, I make sure that they get a minimum amount of foods in the food groups that people tend to not gravitate towards. So fruits and vegetables are a classic example of food groups that are neglected if you don't purposely coach people to just have this stuff. And so for most of my plans, I make sure they have a minimum of 2 fruit servings a day. For most of my plans, I make sure they have a minimum of 3 vegetable servings a day, or at least 2 for those who absolutely hate it. And I make sure they eat vegetables a minimum of 5 days a week. If you want to take 2 days off from vegetables, cool. And so that's how I make sure. And usually people have no problem hitting the meat groups. They have no problem getting the fats in. Some people have no problem getting the 2, 3, sometimes 4 servings of the dairy group in. And so you kind of take it on an individual basis and see what food groups people have difficulty getting in. But it's usually that vegetable and fruit group that people just kind of like automatically neglect. Yeah. And so there's a whole world there with foods and menu planning and all of that stuff that dietitians have had their nose in for just many, many, many years, that the general public and even coaches in the fitness space, they don't really know about.
Again, this is for general health. Like, regardless of your goals, like, these are recommendations that can apply across the board in terms of where's a good baseline to start. It's when you get into this ratio of protein to carbs to fat is the best for putting on muscle, or you have to completely restrict carbs if you want to lose fat. When you start to get into these more specific goals, you get into a lot of these extremes. These claims go against a lot of what you see in the literature. If you know you're in the space, you're studying nutrition science, exercise science, it's almost like what did you say? What was that? So I would like to hear your take on, for example, too much protein is bad for you. You have to start limiting protein. You get into these nuances that may take away from the bigger goals here and the more important pieces of the puzzle.
Some of the most extreme-minded, black-white thinkers, zealots, are unfortunately some of the most vocal commenters in social media threads. And so a recent experience I had with this was when I was on the podcast of my friend, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who's a really cool person. And by the way, speaking of shout-outs, Stan Efferding is just an awesome dude. I love that guy. He's a friend, and he's just another guy with salt of the earth, heart of gold, real good guy. So same with Gabrielle. So I was on Gabrielle Lyon's podcast recently, and when we did our joint post where whoever edited that clip just made it as provocative and Jimmy Rustling as possible, capturing the points where I said, doesn't matter, doesn't matter, none of that crap matters. And so
they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing to get attention.
They sure are. That post went so viral, and my guest spot on her podcast is the most downloaded episode in the history of her podcast, and a lot of it was due to that post. Wow. A lot of it's due to that damn post where it just shows me saying none of that crap matters, and like it resonated positively with some people, and it resonated very negatively with other folks, and so the people who, when I said the amount for fat loss, whether you want to go high carb or low carb doesn't matter. whether you want to position your carbs mostly in the earlier part of the day versus the later part of the day, doesn't matter. When I said that, a lot of folks interpreted it correctly and said in their minds, it doesn't matter. Therefore, you are free to individualize the protocol according to people's personal preferences, tolerances, and goals. So it can be individualized. Hallelujah. Some people can go low carb and thrive. Great. Some people can go high carb and thrive. Great. So that's what people are supposed to think. And that's the message that was being conveyed if you listen to the full episode. But other people, they're like, well, yeah, it does matter because I don't do well on low carb, and I don't do well on high carb, and I need to time my carbs a specific way and stuff in order for it. Well, yeah, that's the next point. You have to structure your plan to click with your individual response, and everybody's going to have different preferences and goals on this. And to your specific question, there's some folks who are on the extreme ends who are just flat out anti-carb. Usually the profile of these folks is they've been running the standard Western diet, which is high in everything, high in fat, high in carbs, high in overall calories, and they've incurred a full range of metabolic derangements, including excess body fat over the years. And then they read a few blogs, and then they listen to a few influencers, and they just kind of get brainwashed into this idea that what's really been messing me up my whole life is the damn carbs. And so the minute they go carnivore, for example, or even keto, and they're just cutting out all foods that have carbs, they don't realize that they're also cutting out the carb-containing foods that are hyper-palatable, highly processed combinations of carbs and fat. And so they are just by default cleaning up their diet, and they'll find out later that they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. But, one step at a time here.
Yes.
There's a lot of folks who have had really good experiences with cutting out carbs completely, and then reading a bunch of bits of literature in the media and just getting this brainwashing that carbs are the bad guy. I know this because I cut them out, and I had this great experience with it, and so therefore I'm emotionally attached to this idea that carbs are bad, and therefore I'm literally going to evangelize this message in every social media comment section that I can. Even if Alan says it's okay to have carbs, what does he know? He doesn't know my pain. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know what I've been through.
Institution.
Right. He got formal education on this stuff. You need to go deep. You need to, you have to go beneath the deep state for this stuff. And so a lot of the people in the carnivore crowd will say, no, carbs are bad. You don't need carbs because they're not an essential protein and fat. You need them, but you don't need carbs. But they neglect to talk about the opportunity cost of avoiding foods that have this tremendous evidence base for preventing and mitigating the effects of chronic disease. There's just far too many plant foods that do exactly that. And far too many carb-rich plant foods that do exactly that. And they're also basically ignoring the body of science on comparisons, diet comparisons of high-carb diets versus low-carb diets when you match protein and total calories. And a lot of people are just not aware of that stuff, and they're just riding high on their emotional attachment to their personal experience with cutting carbs out, going carnivore. When, maybe for them that may be the lesser of the two evils. So you got the two evils, which is the standard, a standard Western diet right here. And then carnivore or keto and carbophobia. This can be the lesser of the two evils. I'll give them that. But as far as optimization, lifelong sustainability, not to mention if you have athletic performance goals and you've got high stakes competitive goals, there's going to be a requirement for carbohydrate in there. Then the conversation changes completely. But a lot of times it's hard to get past people's emotions when they're posting online, and on the learner readiness spectrum, they're over here. They're being the authority. They're being the teacher. They're not being the student. They have zero learner readiness. So it's a lot of times the best you can do is either ignore them or post counter evidence and hope they don't get mad and take it personally. And you're really posting the counter evidence for the lurkers to learn, because a lot of folks are just not there. They're not ready to listen.
Well, okay, that one almost makes more sense to me why people would want to camp over there. What I can't wrap my head around, but I know you've gotten into some discussions with individuals before about, is now the conversation of, I think actually we're talking about this on, I don't know if you've been on Gabrielle's show more than once. The more recent episode, you've been under some siege a little bit because, and she's done awesome work on protein intake, and I know we can all agree how important protein is, and I want to get your idea on it. But now these people coming out about anti-high protein diet on effects as far as longevity goes. Like, where did this idea come from? And can you put a little bit of light on that?
Yeah, the protein restriction model for longevity is based on rodents, flies, and worms. And that's kind of the long and the short of it.
Don't say. I was just saying, like, I feel like that's typically the story. All right, first, well, this has been done on mice. Okay, show me the human studies. Where can I can't find them. But then the conversation typically doesn't accelerate. So yeah, I'm sorry, I was just adding a little side.
Oh yeah, no. Can I get a hell yeah? That's. I just heard. I googled "Can I get a hell yeah," and then I come to this song by Doja Cat, and I'm like, oh, this is where everybody's getting this funny ass nasally hell yeah type of thing, and I'm like, okay, God, this is just bad. This is just bad, but it's really funny. So rodents, flies, and worms, and to your point, Marianna, musculoskeletally and metabolically, as far as the macronutrients go, humans are universes different than flies, worms, rodents. And some people would argue that, okay, well, we need to start somewhere, but that's why rodent work is called preclinical work. We need to take a look at what we find with rodents, especially in the drug realm. Okay, we got the preclinical work on rodents, and let's see if what works in rodents has a chance in hell to actually be replicated and corroborated in humans. And the percentage that it is actually corroborated is minuscule. And so that is a similar scenario with nutrition, from rodents to humans, and certainly from flies and worms to humans. And then you're making an extra leap by saying, okay, longevity. How does this translate to humans? The human animal is super different from flies and worms in that, starting from middle age, it is a tooth and nail battle to hold on to muscle tissue, hold on to lean tissue. Because one of the most significant menaces to longevity is frailty, just basically the withering away of the being. I've witnessed it many times, and in many people, and even with my father, who had some major surgery that immobilized him. And then I just watched month by month, year by year, frailty just take hold. And so it really resonates with me, and it really bothers me when people actually think that protein restriction is a viable and even a valid model for human longevity. Though those people don't even lift, bro.
Don't even live, bro.
And yeah, like Longo, Sinclair, they're like restrict protein and to whatever degree you're calorically restrict. That model, I think it's great for the animals, for the lower life forms that it was experimented on. But with the human longevity model, a much better approach would be to optimize musculoskeletal health. So you can optimize the driver and the engine and the dictator, the puppeteer of cardiometabolic health. Because the musculoskeletal system is literally in charge of our movement and our exercise capacity that enables and drives the cardiovascular system. So we have to optimize the foundation here, the musculoskeletal system. And some folks would call this a muscle-centric approach to longevity. And it's not all about trying to take up as much space as possible or trying to like see how you could walk around like this as much as possible. It's more like, let's get people optimally functional from a strength standpoint and a muscle mass standpoint, so they have the metabolic leverage to handle these various metabolic fuels and retain their lean body mass as the ghost of frailty just kind of creeps up and tries to take them out. And so as you focus on the muscular system and muscle mass and muscle strength while staying lean, that's the recipe for longevity.
Yeah.
And of course that is going to involve a certain amount of physical activity. More is not better with exercise, time spent exercising. But that's kind of the formula. And it just boggles my mind and baffles me and actually bothers me that a lot of folks promote protein restriction without looking at the human research on what happens in the elderly population when you protein restrict.
Mm-hmm. It's not good. It's not good. Well, okay, so I think that sheds a lot of light on it. Is like there's not a ton of just even evidence, but I know a lot of people like to use lack of evidence and just they're usually the ones who are most confident in their claims. I feel like too, but that's another story. Starting there, then, just someone listening, because I know we've talked about it quite a bit. But what's your take? I know just through reading your books, kind of where it's at. Someone who's looking to improve general health, what do you say their protein goal should be? And you can talk about your timing as well. And then does that translate and differ to, let's say, someone who's an athlete or somewhere maybe in the middle who trains 3 to 4 times a week?
Okay, yeah. The protein daily dosing question, we have to first set up the kind of the parameters here. It's like we have to speak in terms of the middle of the distribution. You know, we have to speak in terms of normal body weight when we talk about protein needs. And a little bit more loaded term would be ideal body weight. I like to use the term target body weight or goal body weight when we talk about protein units of measure here with respect to protein per pounds of body weight or kilograms of body weight. We have to make sure we're talking about ideal body weight because some people are in a state of obesity, and if you program their protein needs based on current body weight, you're going to overprescribe. And of course, there's a small amount of people on the other end of the spectrum where if you prescribe protein based on their current body weight, you're going to underprescribe. So talking about protein for units of ideal body weight, there are enough studies and enough data for us to be able to actually say that 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, which translates to 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, is probably the single best bet for optimizing both athletic adaptations, so especially to resistance training, as well as clinical manifestations across the life cycle. So double the RDA would be kind of like if you were to choose the one ring to rule them all, it would be double the RDA. Now, a case can be made for the general population who doesn't necessarily have athletic goals and those types of pursuits where you're kind of pushing the limits of leanness or muscle mass and stuff. A case can be made to go as low as 1.2, but I would rather see people just take advantage of what optimizes everything. So that would be 1.6. And so on the pushing the envelope side of the conversation, you've got all the way up to a gram per pound or 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And even beyond, if we're looking at exploiting the effects of satiety during just weird fringe stuff like bodybuilding contest prep. There's some anecdotal and some observational evidence that shows that as high as 1.5 grams per pound of body weight is what the top 5 finishers are riding with. And as Jim Rohn says, success leaves clues.
It's insane.
So we can't necessarily ignore this uncontrolled observational evidence in the champions. So, but they're a very fringe, very small segment of the population. So we're really looking at 1.6 being kind of the sweet spot, but all the way up to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight if we're looking at physique and athletic goals to include in this whole range. So yeah, that's kind of how it goes. And I would concede that with non-athletic goals, you could potentially go as low as 1.2, although that worries me in the elderly population who's getting frail.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's goal body weight.
Yeah.
When you're saying like the 0.7 to 1.2 per kilogram of goal body weight. Okay, that makes sense. And I think this leads, I know I was really excited to jump into this a little bit. At least what I've noticed in social media a lot now, and I know Gabrielle talks a lot about this, you talk a lot about this. What is your take on the quality of protein where you're getting it, especially in the animal versus plant-based discussion? Because I know Gabrielle has even gone to say on the nutrition label, we list total carb, fat, protein. You have the different sources of fats, the different sources of carbs. We need to have the amino acid profile under protein on the nutrition label. Where do you sit on that camp, and kind of where do you differ the plant versus animal discussion?
I think that this topic, we have to frame it as the fact that we're batting around of speculation. We're batting around a lot of hypotheticals, and so there's nothing definitive we can say about this area at the current time. Once you've hit a certain minimum of total daily protein over a mix of sources, whether they're plant or animal, and that's because of a mounting body of research showing a similar muscle protein synthetic response with certain plant proteins versus animal proteins. However, on balance, the bulk of the data shows that the most commonly consumed plant proteins cannot stand with the most commonly consumed and available animal proteins with respect to the anabolic response, the acute anabolic response being muscle protein synthesis. So that's just the facts. Now you can pump up the dose of certain plant proteins to match the muscle protein synthetic response to certain animal proteins. But then again, gram per gram, animal protein as a group is just more anabolic. Then we can look at a longitudinal research comparing animal and plant protein supplementation. And a lot of it shows no difference between animal protein supplemented diets, like with whey, for example, versus soy supplemented diets. But this is in the context of comparing two omnivorous diets in the first place. So it kind of tells us very little about what's going on with the superiority of one versus another, because you're looking at two mixed omnivorous diets. Now there's some very recent research by Heva Laraine and colleagues that set protein at 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. So they, in quotes, optimized protein and equated them in both groups. It was a 12-week study on resistance trainees, but they started off untrained. And so that is the limitation with the study, which I'll get back to. But there were no significant differences in muscle size and muscle strength gains between the omnivorous group versus the completely vegan group. And this is the first study that has ever made this comparison in human history.
Really?
It's taken us till, I think the study was done in 2021. It's taken us to freaking 2021 to compare a vegan group of resistance trainees with an omnivorous group of resistance trainees while equating protein at an adequate level, 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. And so this was a huge feather in the cap for the plant-based group, or plant-based advocates.
Big time.
They're like, well, looky here. As long as you take in 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, then vegans can run with the omnivores for muscle strength and muscle size gains. But I would strongly throw in the caveat that we're looking at untrained subjects, and newbie gains are a real thing, and newbie gains could mask actual treatment differences between the two types of diets. And so what we really need, and of course, folks on that study, including my friend Stu Phillips, of course, he's like, nope, wouldn't matter anyway. I'm like, bro, come on, get real, Stu. You're brilliant, but let's be a little more open-minded here and a little more discriminating here. We need some replication. We need some replication in trained subjects, and then let's see what happens there. And unfortunately, in the literature, if you've been resistance training for 6 months, then you qualify as trained. And then the leap is made that, all right, so trained subjects would have the same results as athletes and advanced lifters, which is a big leap. So yeah, we look at the research and we keep in mind the limitations, and we say, oh, that's interesting. Let's see where this goes. So yeah, that's kind of the story with plant versus animal proteins. But then if you pan back, there's more issues to look at, because vegans, strict vegans, they're going to be missing out on certain nutrients within meat that are not present in any plant proteins. Creatine, for example. Creatine. The similar sounding carnosine. And then there's things like 4-hydroxyproline, which helps form the connective tissue matrix, collagen, even cholesterol for testosterone and hormone manufacture. And these things collectively could contribute to not just lean tissue building, but general health. And so, of course, in the literature that touts the health superiority of vegan diets, you look at what they're comparing it to, the omnivorous diet they're comparing to, and that's definitely not ideal. So in a theoretical sense, you're still going to be coming up short if you look at all the nutrients that you are missing out on in the animal kingdom there. But whether or not you want to fight for those extra years or months, or the extra ounces or pounds of muscle by going animal or omnivore based and compromising your vegan ideals, well, that's really on you. That's really up to the individual.
Speaking of Stan, who we talked to last week, right? I mean, he's probably the biggest advocate for red meat, right? Bison. He's got me turned on to $11 a pound bison out in Southern California. I love it. But he's a big, I mean, he says and which you kind of agree with him, though, because all these, I think it was a couple Netflix documentaries really started to demonize red meat. Got to find a bad guy somewhere. Really started to demonize red meat. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of people get their nutrition info from, is Netflix, instead of a research review, or instead of following coaches in the field. And he's a big advocate of, it's really one of the only superfoods, if you ever had to categorize a superfood, it's red meat, quality red meat. So it's interesting that not more has been done. And I don't know with where your head's at. Do you see a lot more research going into that to kind of follow up on that study that you mentioned, and to dive deeper into like truly trained individuals, right? Not just, I mean, longer than 6 months, but is there more that is starting to head in that direction because of that study, at least that we might not know about?
It's not on the horizon, unfortunately. It's like there's really no money in that. Where the money is now, and if Bill Gates had his say, it would all go towards trying to duplicate meat, trying to make these Frankenbeefs, through non-animal constituents.
Yeah.
And some people are cool with it, some people are not. I'll eat that animal flesh any day of the week. So I don't think there's any financial and commercial motivation in replicating Lorraine et al. With trained, or certainly with athletic, advanced type lifters. I don't think there's any money in it. So when I work with vegans in practice, especially if they're athletes and the stakes are high, I'm not going to put them at 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. I'll start them at 2.0, just to err on the safe side, because it's not going to compromise the rest of the diet or their carbohydrate allotment anyway. So I'm not going to take chances with that, with low-balling protein for that particular population.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Now, when narrowing goals, and because I think a lot of people choose the vegan perspective for like ethical reasons, which I think is great. Others truly just for like they think it's a healthier, better manner to kind of go through things. Do you think at a point, if it's from like the what is best for my health, like what is best for my health perspective, when someone is truly trying to take the first step into bettering their health, better their diet, what's the best first step they can take? Is it on the side of protein? Is it starting to track food? Where is that first step that people can start to take?
Meg's Fabulous Figure Stop Missing Fries is the first step. It's a mnemonic device for the food groups. So Meg's Fabulous Figure Stop Missing Fries is a mnemonic I thought of, that the first 2 letters of each word correspond with the first 2 letters of each food group. So meat, fat, fibrous vegetables, starchy vegetables, milk and milk products, and fruit. So if you want a balance and a range and a diversity of nutrients, and you want good nutrition, then you should be covering the range of the food groups most days of the week. If we're talking about nutrition and health, and we're not necessarily talking about losing weight or gaining muscle. If we're talking about nutrition and health, that's kind of where it starts. Having an idea of what the hell do I eat in a day? Oh yeah, a few servings of each of those groups a day. That's what you eat. And whether you eat 2 servings from each group or 4 servings of each group depends on your goals and your body mass and your preferences and your tolerances. And so all that can be individualized. So that's the short answer to that question.
I would like to point out to our listeners something real quick. Notice how he didn't say to remove, that it wasn't centered around what to take away. And I find that to be so valuable, and I always listen for that, because when you think in the context of your life of what you can take away from it, you kind of lose this piece of how am I adding to my life in anything that I'm doing, if you're so focused on what you need to avoid. And I really think this approach with diet and health is one that allows a lot of room to adjust for your environment, to adjust for your situation, and to see where you can add these pieces and where you can hit these nutrition goals within your life. It leaves a lot of flexibility, I think is the best term there. So I just like to point that out because that is so valuable. But then when you do, because I know we do have listeners who do have this, I want to lose fat, I want to build muscle. How does that conversation change for them, if at all?
Yeah.
Great point. Thanks for bringing that up, and I 100% agree. So the whole idea of how does the conversation change for muscle gain and fat loss? Muscle gain and fat loss share a common non-negotiable, which is getting your protein right. And so that range, once again, would be roughly 0.7 or 1.6 grams per kilogram, 0.7 grams per pound. And if you want to start pushing the envelope, then you can ride up to 2.2 grams per kilogram or a full gram per pound of target body weight. So that's sort of the common thread between the muscle gain and the fat loss thing. You get your protein right. And then with muscle gain, it's a matter of carefully running caloric surplus and marrying that with progressive resistance training. And with fat loss, it's really a matter of carefully setting a caloric deficit and seeing how you can best sustain that caloric deficit. And once again, of course, on the training side, you would use resistance training as a means to preserve lean body mass while you lose body fat. So yeah, there's whole worlds within those two models to discuss.
So more specifically, I think we lost Marianna a bit, so we'll see if
hey man, that was a zinger of a interjection she made. That was super good points that she was making.
I know, right? It's never the conversation. That's almost a good compass, right? It's never the conversation of what do you need to take away, but it's like, okay, let's start adding.
Hell yeah, that's such a good point, man.
Is phenomenal. Now, because I mean, that's what we try and do the best, and what we try and do through the show is like try and help people get a compass, because there's so much crap. There's so much good stuff. There's so much crap out there. So okay, so let's break it down in a hierarchy. So if you're just trying to improve overall health, it's looking at these major food groups. If you want to take it to the next step of improving body composition, which so many people are struggling with, I hear calories and protein are the next two things to pay attention to. Would you say the carb and fat groups, if we're talking about macros, at what point do those fall in? Is it when you start to get more and more serious, more and more lean, more and more as a trained individual? And I want to get your take on what you would consider a trained individual too, because I don't know about 6 months being a good consideration, but when does that start to make more of a difference? And then, when would you consider someone a trained individual?
Okay, so let's talk about the trained versus untrained thing. The research definition of trained is that you're not a rank newbie. You're not straight off of the couch.
Yeah.
So that's the research definition, because they have to kind of keep things simple. And if they raise their limits too much, then you're never going to find people to recruit for the studies. So that's an unfortunate limitation with research.
Yeah, seriously.
But trained folks, I think, more intermediate, at least intermediately trained folks. And just speaking in very general terms, this is pretty subjective, because with some people you can just pull them off the street and make them intermediately trained in like 3 months. There are some people who's just animals like that. They're just built like that.
Yeah.
But most people trained, I would prefer a full year of consistent progressive resistance to be able to be called trained. And highly trained would be folks involved with competitive athletics at a reasonably high level. So not only do they have that experience, but they likely have a little bit more of the elite body composition levels as well. So those would be kind of the 3 tiers: untrained, straight off the couch; intermediate or trained; and then highly trained, athletic.
And at what point do you think along that progression does the carb and fat start to matter a little bit more outside of just personal preference?
It would depend a lot on the athletic goal. It would depend a lot on the athletic goal, because carb requirements, they vary throughout the strength endurance continuum. And there's some very interesting and kind of unintuitive findings in this area. So, for example, endurance competition, carbs matter quite a bit. And this is especially apparent in research comparing ketogenic models with the high carb conventional high carb control diets. And the weight of the evidence shows that the higher carb models just simply beat the ketogenic models for endurance performance. The majority of the studies. There's studies here and there showing that they're on equal ground, but when you look at the totality of evidence in this area, it's very clear that you are very much gambling and taking a risk and taking a bad bet if you're going to put your elite endurance high stakes competitors on keto. Even with guys who are outliers, anomalies like Zach Bitter, who used to hold the 100-mile run record for quite a while. Now, I just spoke to him. I just did his podcast. I interrogated him as to his carbohydrate intake, and it ranges from 100 to 150 grams for most of the year, most of the competitive season. So that's like triple keto. He's not a keto athlete. Come on, guys. But he's still maybe a third or a fourth of what his competitors are consuming. So he's still a kind of a unique animal there.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, tying back to my answer, carbs versus fat allotment and programming depends on the athletic goal. So endurance will suffer from low carb keto, generally speaking. Maximal strength, on the other hand, interestingly, the literature shows just a messy mix of results that don't definitively lean towards the high carb model. It almost shows that athletes can survive keto and kind of hold it together and be on par with the high carb control diets for maximal strength parameters. But the caveat with this research is a lot of it does not match protein, unfortunately. So, when you match protein or when you put people on keto, especially in an ad libitum or unrestricted fashion, and you transition them from their habitual diet, or certainly from a standard Western diet, to keto, then there's usually a significant increase of protein, 50 to 100% increase in protein. So like a doubling of protein intake. And so protein is finally optimized. And hey, what do you know? They have the same maximal strength in keto as they did with the baseline conditions, but there's that one caveat of not matching protein. So the literature on keto and maximal strength is messy. I still wouldn't take that bet. If you're working with high stakes competitive athletes, wouldn't take the keto bet on them bringing the gold home. And then there's the issue of the body composition goal, fat loss versus muscle hypertrophy. So with fat loss, the carb-fat proportion, regardless of whether we're talking about trained guys or fresh off the couch, rank beginners, with the fat loss goal, that's where there truly is the most flexibility. And when I say it doesn't matter, I don't want people to make that mental leap that I'm literally saying it doesn't matter, period. I'm saying it doesn't matter, therefore you can individualize your carb intake based on personal preference and goal. So you can try to go zero carb if you want. If the goal is fat loss, it's not going to be practical, not going to be sustainable. Your life is going to be very difficult. Or you can go high carb, low fat if you want, if the goal is fat loss. Now there's limits with fat intake, with lower thresholds of fat intake that we see adversely impact hormone production. And that's usually like below 20% of total calories. But that's kind of another conversation. But if we're talking about fat loss, that's where you have the most flexibility of carb and fat proportion for programming. Now, if we're talking about muscle gain, then it appears that going full-blown keto or 50 grams of carbs or less per day, that appears to make the goal of muscle gain quite difficult. And it's a highly inefficient way to go about trying to optimize muscle gain. I mean, you can still do it. There's folks who can gain muscle on keto. It's just a highly inefficient way to do it, and this has been shown in a few recent studies, most notably by Vargas Molinas, or is it Vargas Molinas? No, Vargas Molina and colleagues. That makes all the difference in the world. And they actually attempted to impose hypercaloric conditions on their subjects. And in the keto side of things, on both the two separate studies, one with men, one with women, the keto group couldn't sustain hypercaloric conditions on keto because it's hard to do. The palatability of the diet just goes through the basement. The motivation to eat a whole lot on keto just is not there. And it reinforces prior observations that when you go on keto, you tend to spontaneously eat hundreds of calories less than your normal baseline habits. And that's something that persists for sometimes as long as a few months before you start creeping up. And that's a whole other conversation. But circling back to your question, Tony, about when does carb and fat proportion matter, and does trained versus untrained status play in? Yes, it does, but we have to first look at the bigger categories of goals where with competitive endurance athletes, carbs matter. So keto can be detrimental. With competitive strength athletes, a little bit more messy mix of findings, but it doesn't seem to be as crucial. But I still wouldn't take a chance on keto. With fat loss, it truly I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter. It can be individualized. It should be individualized with fat loss because it doesn't matter. And then with muscle gain goals, it does seem to matter. But that lower threshold of carbohydrate intake that would optimize muscle goals, we can only speculate based on observational data. And that seems to converge on roughly 3 grams per kilogram of body weight, all the way up to like 5, 6, 7, 8 grams per kilogram of body weight is what the elite in the strength and power sports and the physique sports would be taking in to gain muscle. So there appears to be this kind of lower effective intake of 3 grams per kilogram is what, like 1.6 grams per pound or something like that. Something like that, if I got the math okay. But keto would be a bad bet for trying to gain muscle.
So we can rule out keto being a surefire method for most of those
Except for fat loss. For fat loss.
I mean, from what it sounds like, I think that the takeaway is
fat loss.
Yes.
Keto works amazingly well, but it seems to people just can't sustain it. They just can't adhere to it because at the 12-month mark, for all the studies that run keto for that long, the majority of the subjects are eating triple the amount of carbohydrates compared to what they were assigned at baseline. So that's the only caveat with that.
Huge caveat at that, from what it sounds like. Or at least I would consider it a huge caveat.
And of course, there's real quick, there's a subset of keto avengers, who can do it for life and can sustain it for life. So, and they'll be up in arms and say, well, no, you're wrong, because I can sustain it for life. I've been doing keto for the last 10 years. Okay, cool. I agree with you, and do you, more power to you, but you're in the minority. Simple and plain, you're in the minority. I always do this, I take this inventory when I do conferences on this particular topic. And I ask the audience to raise their hand if they've ever tried keto. And it's usually half the audience or more raises their hands. And I say, okay, keep your hands up if you're still on keto. The whole freaking room. It's rare that even like 1, 2, or 3 people are like, so it is what it is, man.
Yeah. Marianna, welcome back. We actually were just making a joke because you came in the last time with a zing. Great question. And then dropped it back off. So
my Wi-Fi. Hopefully we're good for now. I'll be able to watch
little
it back
lightning bolt.
and listen to the answer in full. So.
And drop a zinger at the end.
I just want to make a comment on that because we talk about, a lot of people talk about what's the best food to eat for longevity? How little can I eat within this window to live the longest? And it's like, why are you ignoring the topic of the longevity of how I'm eating? How long can I do this for? How long can I adhere to this? Can I actually see myself being consistent in the long term. And that behavioral aspect, just being human in general, is so often ignored, and which is why I think from like the general person can make this fitness weight loss experience seem so undesirable, because you're flooded with so much information on what you should and shouldn't do, ignoring this is a human being. How can I look at my life and take a bit of pieces that I may see myself doing for forever and enjoy. And I think that piece is so often missing. So I love having these conversations and kind of hearing we have people who are leaders in this space, and they take into account individuals, person to person. So I think people need that reminder sometimes, because it is so overwhelming.
Instead of thinking
Another zinger.
like the longevity model is just vehemently pushing caloric restriction. That's ridiculous. I would rather see people pushing, be physically active within the limits of your, of reason, of your schedule and your capabilities, and eat enough calories to fuel the sustenance of that physical activity. Not calorically restrict for its own sake. That's just ridiculous. So great point once again, Marianna. Thank you for the zinger.
I'm here for that. Thanks.
Comes in, strikes, 1-2 punch. So we wanted to know, I think Marianna had a good one, in setting up and determining that, because you hear on social media today, just like you said, calorie restriction, and especially like apps like MyFitnessPal, who we almost have a personal vendetta against the way they set calories up for most people. What's the Aragon method for determining how many calories you need?
It's a huge question, and it's a pain in the butt if you were to try to crunch the numbers on. I set up this online calculator. Just do it for you. You punch in your target body weight, and you punch in your exercise hours, total weekly exercise hours on average, and then you estimate your non-exercise activity level. So your exercise activity level, non-exercise activity level, and your target body weight, and then you can come up with an educated guess on what your total daily caloric intake needs would be for a given body weight at a given physical activity level. And that's really the best we can do with estimating caloric needs. But even better, people have to realize that if you know the amount of calories that is maintaining your current body weight, body composition at your current activity level, if you know what those calories are, then you really don't need a calculator, an online calculator to make an educated guess for you. If you can just, online calculators are mainly useful for people who want to know the hypotheticals of a different body weight and different activity level that they may be shooting for. But if you happen to know it maintains you, it's a simple matter of adjusting up or down from there, or not, depending on your goal. So that's kind of the overview of that. And traditional methods of estimating calories don't emphasize enough that if you know what maintains you now, then it is a simple matter of adjusting up or down, or not, depending on the goal.
I love that, and I think that's something I feel like it goes under this umbrella of, well, my maintenance still might be different from the next person. So I think that is something that's very underrated. So I'm really glad you brought that up in terms of maintenance calories. A lot of people don't know, but then they'll strive to know from a calculator versus, has my weight really hasn't changed over the past 2-3 months? Maybe let's see, like, I'm going to eat how I'm typically eating for maybe 2-3 weeks and get an average from there. Personally, when I see my clients do this, and you can compare the kind of recommendation versus this is what it's actually been sustaining me this whole time, it can be really eye-opening and interesting to see.
Yeah, for sure. You've got to cross-check online calculators, which can be useful for giving you at least an idea if somebody is, like, for example, very far from the body weight that they need to be. Then it can help for them to have a theoretical number of calories that should support them, like 50 pounds less at X type of activity level, X amount of activity level. It's good to kind of have that target in mind to compare with what you're eating right now, and what sort of differences you may need to make in order to kind of gradually morph into that target. But yeah, if you know what's maintaining you now, you can manipulate it from there, and that's actually a bit more objective way to go about it. But some people don't
Big
know
time.
maintains them right now, and they're really frustrated, and they want to get the theoretical number.
Yeah.
And so in that case, it doesn't necessarily hurt to hop onto the calculator and figure that out. And most calculators or most traditional methods for determining total daily caloric needs are based on resting metabolic rate multiplied by an activity factor. And so even those are just very rough estimates.
Well, I have a quick one on that, though, because I know a lot of people come to me a little frustrated because they're like, okay, where is my maintenance? And tracking in itself is kind of a skill you have to learn and develop. And I think people forget that. Some people will come to us and say, okay, well, I'm taking in 1,000 calories per day. I'm taking in 1,000 calories per day. I'm not losing weight. Do I adjust lower than that? What's your answer to
whenever somebody says that, the first thing that comes to my mind is, okay, this person, 99% chance they've been chronically dieting for months or years, and they're just psychologically fatigued from the process. And so they either need to take a diet break, almost like a classic diet break would be a week off of restricting and micromanaging and just being on the formal program. Or they need to just kind of take a vacation from the focus on weight loss. Just take a psychological break from the goal of weight loss and shift the goal to something else. Like performance, for example. Performance increases, fitness increases. Just exercise performance, whether it be improvements in lifting or whether it be even improvements in endurance type training. Shift the focus on that. Just stop worrying about the weight loss thing for a while because you're psychologically fatigued. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, and that's because I've just seen that time and time and time again. And the second thing that comes to my mind immediately is there's a high likelihood that this person is underestimating the actual amounts that they're taking in, whether it's on a daily basis or whether it's on a meal-to-meal basis, or whether it's on a weekly basis where they're kind of sweeping under the rug the drinks on the weekend, the snacks, the dinners out, the business lunches, the family gatherings, where things just sort of sneak across the table and into the mouth. And there's many ways that people can underestimate their intake. And immediately coming to mind is Lichtman et al. In the 90s, a study that looked at obese patients who claimed to eat 1,200 calories or less, but were unable to lose weight. And so when they corralled these folks and surveilled them and put them basically under the microscope, they found that they were eating about 1,300 calories more on average than they thought they did. And that was very eye-opening.
Yes.
Really eye-opening. They're at least eating, the range of that they were eating more than they thought was 700 or so to 1,000 calories. And that is substantial. That's like a whole other large meal.
That's big.
That you're not accounting for in terms of the calories that kind of go unreported. And this was not purposeful unreporting. This was just accidental, just unintentional misreporting, which is super common. And it actually is more common in the obese population versus the normal weight population. And that's because, there could be a bunch of social forces, environmental forces going on with the obese population that the normal weight population isn't necessarily dealing with. So yeah, that would be my take on people saying, hey, I'm consuming 1,000 calories right now and I'm not losing weight. You're seeing this person as, for example, a body weight that would require 3,000 calories to maintain. That disconnect is not. That disconnect has to be looked at a lot more closely, and a lot of times has to do with this person's diet fatigue, which is fueling either intermittent binging, or just misreporting, or just the weight of the psychological fatigue of dieting that's making them incapable of consistently complying to the program. And it's torture for folks to try to restrict for months and years on end without a diet break, without regular diet breaks, or without shifts in focus of the goal completely off of the scale. There's some really interesting research by Clark and colleagues. It was a 2-year study of obese patients, and they set them up on a baseline diet that was kind of an interesting diet. It was a high protein diet. Well, high protein by research standard, so 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight, and carb intake was limited to 100 grams per day. So it was kind of low carb, but not non-ketogenic low carb. And then they set them off on their way with the training programs, and specifically told them, you are not to focus on body weight. You're not to get on the scale. You're not to care about the scale or weight loss. We're just going to do this thing and focus on fitness improvements and exercise performance improvements. And by the end of the 2-year study, some spectacular amount of weight was lost. I want to say 30-ish% of total body weight. 30, was it even 35? It was at least 30% of body weight that was lost, which is a tremendous loss of initial body weight, considering that clinically significant body weight loss is somewhere between 5 and 10% at the end compared to baseline. So these people really crushed it, and they crushed it by not focusing on body weight, but focusing on something completely different, exercise performance. And so there is some wisdom to be gleaned there that we can apply to people who are psychologically fatigued with the dieting process. Maybe switch the goals for a period of time.
I love that. I freaking love that. Like, switch the goal, switch the target. That's absolutely huge. In tying that bow a little bit, I do want to kind of say this. Okay, so obviously the big focus I want to kind of point people to, and I even was talking to you about this, like, I wish more coaches were required to read something like this. Like, read this. Like, obviously. But even just the person that is confused in their diet, in their health journey, read this book. And I think today gave a lot of clarity too. Anyone who's really trying to gain an upper hand and to really start to understand their health better, a research review starting with yours would be a phenomenal place to start. Where would you point people, especially if they want to get more of you outside of those two areas? Where can they find
outside
more
of the book and the research review? Or
yes.
Well, gosh, I don't know. I suppose you could.
Or would that just be like, let's just leave it there?
If you check out my social media, if you follow me on social media, you'll get these little sound bites. And occasionally you'll get me having a knockdown, drag-out debate with somebody in the comments section. That can be highly entertaining and educational, but it you'll either love me or hate me by the end of reading that debate. So I would say, you know what, man, my book, Flexible Dieting, is really a good foundation for nutritional knowledge because it covers all the goals. It covers muscle gain, fat loss, and athletic performance. And I really tried to take a holistic approach to just building perspective about diet and nutrition. And it's the nutrition book that I wish I had access to while I was a student in the nutrition curriculum, in the undergrad as well as the graduate degree. So I would point folks to the Flexible Dieting book. And if they want to kind of delve into the research as it trickles in and they want to stay current with that, then the monthly research review would be recommended as well. But I have to admit, most of the people who are subbed to my research review are just really hardcore enthusiasts. They're either professionals or they're just hardcore enthusiasts who really love the scientific and the research aspect of things. So yeah, I would definitely encourage both, but I'm definitely biased towards encouraging those things. So.
All right, that is a clean wrap on the episode. Marianna, how was it?
It was wonderful, fantastic. I cut out a bit, but that's all right. We kept moving. We learned from this and we move forward. Technology is what it is sometimes. But to support us and so we can keep reaching as many people as possible, you can leave us a 5-star review. Any feedback is amazing. Shoot us a DM. Instagram, it is fs.pod, along with TikTok, fs.pod. We are also on YouTube. Fitness stuff, in parentheses, for normal people. We have a Twitter, but we don't tweet. We're getting there.
We have a Twitter, but we don't tweet.
Anything I missed, Tony?
That was good. That's what we got. Hopefully y'all enjoyed Alan. We know he's coming back for round 2. Have a productive rest of your day. We love you.